Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our latest Upskill with Read Tech webinar series. Today's topic will be year-end deadlines. Today, your presenters will be Julia Frasch, who is an account manager on our pharma team here at Read Tech, and Gary Siener, our senior manager of information solutions for life sciences. Just a couple quick logistics. Hopefully everyone is familiar with GoToWebinar, but this is a live recording, so all the participants are muted. But if you have any questions or concerns, you can just drop those in the chat box, and we can help you through any technical difficulties. And then we will be doing some Q&A after the presentation, so make sure you keep your questions coming, and we'll get to them at the end. And as always, we will be sending out the slides and video link shortly thereafter the webinar. So what we're looking at covering today is an overview of FDA drug annual deadlines, the FDA drug year-end requirements, drug data storage and management, and a little Q&A session with Gary and Julia. For anything that you're interested in that we may not cover today, we would point you to our Knowledge Center on our readtech.com homepage that you see here. And you'll get a copy again of this slide showing the navigation to get to the correct topic. And then we also encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter to stay up to date on the latest updates. And with that, I will hand the presentation off to today's speakers, Gary and Julia. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Erin. And it's a pleasure to have everybody here with us. The first thing that we're going to kind of go into is a high-level overview of the FDA's drug annual deadlines. So the kind of deadlines that we're seeing year over year in this certain period from October to December. So this is a list of some of the items that need to get completed throughout the course of the entire year, you know, all regulatory activities. So this is, again, just a partial list of all of the things that you probably do throughout the year. So maybe it's marketing authorization or, you know, updating your drug labels, any annual reporting. You know, there's lots here on this list, but we're going to cover the establishment registration and the drug label and listing the most today to kind of really review those annual requirements that happen at the end of the year. And with that, Gary, can you give us some background on the annual reporting period?
Yeah, sure. Julia, I noticed that establishment registration and our drug label listing topic, one of the common denominators there is the submission platform, the submission file format of SPL. So, you know, we kicked around this topic a little bit. I think what we'll do is just do a quick little refresher on SPL so that it's we're going to use it in conversation throughout the time today. So we do want to make sure everyone is familiar with SPL. I'll cruise through this information on SPL rather quickly. If it's new to you, you can download the slides and do some homework or get in touch with us. But real quickly, SPL stands for the Structured Product Labeling. It is a Health Level 7 standard, and now it has been adopted by FDA and Health Canada to capture product information. So Health Level 7 provides a schema, which is this standard, the rules of the road of how you would create a document. And they are a standards developing organization. And with that particular common platform, both the FDA and Health Canada have put together a number of specifications, if you will, referred to as implementation guides. In some cases, they have controlled vocabularies of a particular value. And then they also provide a style sheet which provides instructions on how to present that information by using a browser. So the FDA has been working with HL7 over a number of years, and they have created a number of documents. They put this guidance together, and I think there's well over 50 of these particular SPL implementations now. And most recently, noteworthy, especially if those in the audience also manufacture cosmetics, the FDA did use this very same standard to put together some requirements for listing cosmetic products and also registering cosmetic establishments. So keep that in mind if you're in that particular industry as well. And then just to complete the conversation, Health Canada had also used this standard, and they had their own set of implementation guides and vocabulary and style sheet and so on. They use the HL7 SPL standard for something called XML product monograph. We've talked about these two other topics in other webinars, so we don't go much further into these topics today. Now, if you looked over the course of time, the number of SPLs, and this is, again, only a partial list of all the documents that the FDA has designated. We won't go through all these, but it has a pretty long history. It started back in 2005. And most recently, literally just a month or so ago, the SPL created this SPL for the cosmetic establishment registration and the cosmetic listing. So pretty long list. Now, this is a timeline going way back in time and showing the evolution. But what we want to take a look at is what your calendar looks at like for particular year after year, and what particular requirements are in play and what you need to adhere to. And it's a really busy calendar. So if you have the time, you can download, again, the presentation and do some homework here. Some of these particular events and milestones would be for biologics. There's a particular milestone for generic drug manufacturers. If you are one of the few companies that have a REMS program for one of your drug products, that's on there. But today we're going to focus in on the fourth quarter of your calendar and look at the establishment registration requirements, the blanket no change certificate, and also the drug listing. And again, just a note, if you also manufacture cosmetics, there's an end-of-year requirement this year that's officially in place, and we'll talk just a little bit more about that. Julia, I'm going to turn this back to you. Do you want to switch gears? I think, with that little bit of background, we can launch into the topics of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. The first requirement that we are going to look at, and we can go to the next slide for that one, we're going to be looking at the drug establishment registration, which you just mentioned is one of the, the requirements that we're seeing at the end of the year. There are, there's a handful of other requirements that we're going to move through in the rest of the webinar, but the first one is being those establishment registrations and kind of what are the requirements that are needed in order to stay compliant over at the end of the year with your establishment registration, and which parties might be responsible for that.
All right. Well, let's talk about some of the requirements and what would happen during the first 3 quarters of the year for your establishment registration. There's a number of regulations and time requirements. If you have a new establishment, there's some recommendations. If you have a change, maybe you're adding a site or there's a change to the contact information or something, and it's very possible that you shut down a particular site facility. And there is this ability to deregister a particular facility, and hopefully it does not occur for this particular crowd. But in the event you do go out of business, you have to report that to the FDA and make that establishment registration showing that you're out of business. Now, though all those changes, and there's a bunch of rules around those, they are effective for the current year. Now let's take a look at what happens in the fourth quarter. So in the fourth quarter, you have to do at least one of these particular activities. The no change notification is probably the most common one, meaning that all the information that you provided earlier about a particular establishment is correct and it's current, nothing happening, no changes were occurred, nothing, no new establishment, no establishments were retired or shut down. So that's one of your options. That's actually the most common one. Basically to submit a document to the FDA telling them that, hey, no change, we're still in business, things are normal. Now, you do have the option of submitting some of these other ones, the new establishment, a change to your establishment, deregistration, or out of business. If one of those occur, then you don't have to submit a no change notification. It's just one on this list has to be submitted to the FDA in the fourth quarter. And the noteworthy part of that is when it is done in the fourth quarter, that particular registration is effective throughout the following year. So you definitely want to make sure you're within that 3-month window, October through December, and have this done. Now, Julia, the information that is sent to the FDA and submitted, a lot of that information is captured in this drug database. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and maybe get some statistics on it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the sites you see kind of linked here, and you'll get these slides after, so you can utilize those links. They are all places where you can go to search for your current drug establishment. So if you're ever confused if they are currently registered and what that date they're registered until is, you can go onto these sites. Other information that you can find on there is business operations associated with your establishment, names, DUNS numbers. So they're really good repositories for information regarding your establishment registration. And right now it's important because you can look to see when your establishment registration is certified until. So thank you. So just like this is a great example of what you're going to see when you go onto that FDA drug establishment registration site. You can see this top example of John Layler Joyce. His organization's establishment registration is good through 12/31/2024, which means that they were, they had done that update or the establishment no change notification in this time period that Gary had mentioned. So in between October and November, they did one of the items listed there. So they are good until the end of next year. And then at the end of next year, they'll have to do the same thing. For the organization below, they are currently only registered until the end of 2023. So all of those items listed, creating an update or just doing the no change notification or delisting or a new establishment registration, they will have to do prior to the end of the year. So right now is the time for them to get that establishment registration into good standing until the end of the following year. Perfect. And then this is, again, just a little bit more information showing some of the statistics you can find on those sites that are linked from the FDA. This is currently showing a total of 10,690 current active establishment registrations. There are about 5,794, about 54%, that will expire before the end of the year. So again, it might be good to just go into that site that we linked, the FDA Decker site, and confirm that your establishment is good until the end of that time. But we're also seeing 46%, or that 4896, expiring in 2024. So they have all participated in one of those end of the year activities in order to keep their establishment registration active.
Julia, I think this is actually pretty good progress. We're 1 month into the 3-month window, and it looks like roughly half, a little bit under half, have already made efforts to re-register. So I think this is a pretty good report.
Yeah, I fully agree. We got a month, more than a month left, almost 2, so that's the time to get this stuff done and in good standing.
All right, let's get it done before Thanksgiving and Christmas for sure.
Yes, then you can enjoy those holidays. So the next item we're going to go into is, reviewing the drug listings and what that entails for end of year reporting, and I'll pass it off to you, Gary, to kind of provide more details on that.
Sure. This is, again, a kind of a side-by-side comparison, what happens during the course of the year and what needs to happen in the fourth quarter. So we're talking about product listing, the actual drug listings. Again, there's requirements. If you have a product that is under a marketing application and then you get approval to your NDA or ANDA or BLA or whatever, that particular approval typically connected with a notice that says, I would like you to provide a product listing within 14 days of this approval. So that presents some timing, and then there's another regulation that indicates if you start up a new establishment and you have a drug that's being manufactured at that particular site, then there's a 3-day limit after the initial establishment registration for that site. And in other cases, then, prior to distribution, you want to make a drug listing. Now, in regulations, there's 2 months out of the year, June and December, that are specifically identified that a manufacturer needs to take a look at their listing, make sure it's or that it's up to date and that it has accurate information. Certainly the FDA prefers that a listing be made any time upon the change. They want actual current information as much as possible, but these 2 months are specifically carved out, June and December, where you do have to take a look at your particular listing, and we actually see an uptick at those 2 months during the course of the year. If you do remove a product from commercial distribution, there is a way to delist that product with that marketing end date and so on. Now, if you do this activity anytime during the 4 months of the calendar year or the 12 months of the calendar year, that activity will be effective through next year. So basically you'll remain on the good list at the FDA. During the fourth quarter, if you had not made any of those changes, and you don't expect to make any of those changes by December or the end of December, then you must submit something called a blanket no change. And this particular document lists the various drug products that you have, and you're able to basically notify the FDA that these products are still in production and there's been no change. The last registration is still good. So again, if you make that particular submission, the blanket no change, it's also effective through next year. So you're in good standings if you make any of these particular submissions throughout the course of the year, basically letting the FDA know that you're alive and well, and in some cases you made some changes. Again, Julie, I think there's a whole bunch of databases out there that all centered around the NDC directory, and there's a lot of options to download information. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit and maybe look at some stats.
Yeah, absolutely. The NDC directory is, I'd say, the first and foremost of all the sites, but there is always, Daily Med, different sites that you can look up your active and inactive drug listings. However, the National Drug NDC directory is the FDA site that provides a comprehensive list of just about every single NDC code that is currently registered with them. This time of year, it's at any time of the year, in my opinion, it's a very helpful tool to kind of see a comprehensive list of your currently active drug listings. So at the end of the year, you're able to go into the NDC directory and type in your labeler code, and you'll see a list of NDC codes that are associated of all of your NDC codes, and then they will also have a date associated with them. So you'll be able to see if your listing is certified through, say, the end of 12/31/2023, or like Gary mentioned, if you make any updates, any slight changes to that drug listing throughout the year will cause it to be certified until the end of the following year as well. So now is a really good time to go in to the NDC directory or any of these different files that the FDA provides, because there is a handful, from unfinished drugs to compounded drugs. And you can go in and confirm which drug listings you might need to include on a blanket no change, or if all of your products are good until the end of the following year. The NDC directory will be able to really show you exactly what's going on with those certified through dates. So it's important all year, but it's definitely really important now to go in there and look at those dates and make sure everything is in good standing in terms of those certified through times.
Yeah, I think we have some stats on the number of drugs that are currently being certified and already certified for 2024. So you want to walk through this particular chart a little bit?
Yeah, so right now it's a quite similar ratio to what we're seeing with those establishment registrations, where we're seeing, there is more prescription drugs that are only certified until the end of this year. But, with OTC drugs, we're seeing, about 22,000 certified until the end of this year. So they will need to participate in the blanket no change, or they'll need to update those drug listings, whatever, is more suited for your organization. There's about 22,000 that still need to be certified. However, there's a higher number of products that are certified until the end of 2024. So they'll be all good until the end of next year. And then again, if you made an update in January of 2024, they would be good until the end of 2025. We're seeing, very, very similar numbers when it comes to prescription drugs. And even higher, more products in that standardized and not allergenic medicines. There's only 400 left that would need to be recertified with that blanket no change. There's 1,700 that are all good until the end of 2024. And then the same is below. There's a lower number in total of those vaccines and cellular therapy drugs. But we're seeing some good progress. Very half and half, but we still have those 2 months left as it's, November 2nd. So there's a lot of time to get all of those drug listings in good standing. And then there are about 52 drug listings out there that are completely expired. So you definitely don't want to end up on that list. There is a list actually in one of those links that provided that will also show any of the expired or inactivated drug products. Another way to tell if your product's been inactivated is if you go on DailyMed, it will have a red line at the top that says this NDC code is inactivated. The other place to be checked would be the FDA's NDC directory, because it won't appear there for you if it was inactivated. But again, this is the time to get those reactivated if they're still on the market, or if they've been off the market. It's a good thing to do is to delist those products. So some activities to do at the end of the year, and here is just some statistics kind of showing the numbers of drugs that are good until the end of 2023 as well as 2024.
Yeah, this expired list looks really low right now. I expect January 1 is when the FDA, reevaluates and triggers the expired products. So I do expect that to go up. If I remember last year, it's up to thousands of expired products that, for whatever reason, they didn't make the cutoff of December 31st. And then there's a lot of remediation through the beginning of January and on into the first quarter of the following year. So you, like Julie said, you don't want to find your products on that expired list. That's like the naughty list. So try to avoid that at all costs. It is able to be resolved, but you do have to resolve it, one at a time with that SPL file. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Julia, what's next? I think we have some information on the blanket no change.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's it was a perfect segue into talking kind of about exactly what the end of the year blanket no change, requirements are. Maybe go to the next one. Thank you. So basically, at the end of the year, there is a registration that you can do for any products that haven't had any changes called the Blanket No Change certification. Basically, this lets the FDA know that your products are still out there being sold, but there has not been any changes in this calendar year. So it is an STL file or structured product labeling, as Gary, spoke a little bit about earlier. And again, it is mandatory during the October to December timeframe. The one really great thing about Blanket No Change, and as Gary said, you don't want to be on that inactive list because you have to do them one by one. With Blanket No Change, you're able to include all of your NDC product code, all product codes on the Blanket No Change. So it is a one conversion and a submission. So, you include all of those NDCs and then you'll see them all change. But if that is missed, then there's a lot of extra work to be done there. So we highly recommend not missing this time period to get that Blanket No Change in. So we're going to go into just a little bit about the scope of, who is required to participate in the Blanket No Change certification at the end of the year. And really it's any active drug listing. So if you have an active drug listing, you probably have to participate in the Blanket No Change recertification. One of the only exceptions is for veterinary products, and that is followed a different process. But again, if you have an active drug listing, you're more than likely required to participate in the Blanket No Change recertification. So any unapproved and unapproved listings, prescription, OTC, biologics, really anything that you're selling as an active drug product has to be part of this Blanket No Change. And the same is to be said for, homeopathic. So anything that is currently listed with the FDA and it isn't a veterinary product does need to participate in the Blanket No Change. That is if you have not updated the product within this calendar year or listed the product, a new drug product, in this calendar year as well. So again, this is kind of just covering some of that criteria that we mentioned earlier today. So if the drug product was newly listed or updated or certified in this calendar year, so say you updated your product or newly listed your product in 2023 and you went on to the NDC directory to see when it was certified through, it will say until the end of 2024, because some of that activity that you did is that notification to the FDA basically saying, hey, we're still selling this product or it's new, so there hasn't been enough time passed to really make it an active product. So if you list it in January, you're still good until January of the following year. Some of the criteria that if the product has been delisted or expired or inactive, you want to make sure that you're delisting them and not leaving them on those FDA sites. We definitely, some of them you'll see still sitting there when you look up on Daily Med with that red line. They won't be in the NDC directory if they do get, inactivated. However, you definitely want to make sure you're delisting your products with the FDA to make sure you're in all good standing and you don't end up with a big cluster of products on that inactivated or excluded list. And Gary, I'm not sure if you have anything to add on this slide.
No, I think you covered it really well. The the delisted, expired, or deficient, or inactive, there's some real subtle FDA definitions there that separate them out. But you are able to check your current status of your drug to make sure that it meets this criteria. And anyone that is being handled by the FDA, out of normal and getting special attention from the FDA, you definitely want to be aware of that. But I think we'll move on to maybe, now that we understand some of the criteria, how about some of the information about who is responsible, who actually has to submit this, this label or code, or the end of the year blanket no change.
Absolutely. So really the required party to participate in any of these, registrations with the FDA would be the establishment registrant. So anybody who is manufacturing, any relabelers, CMOs, contract manufacturers. So if you're an organization that hires another company to produce your products, they are responsible to do this blanket no change. Also if you have an authorized agent, so say your organization is out of the country, U.S. agents or importers or consultants would be the responsible party. The one thing to note is that we do sometimes see CMOs and their distributors. The distributors will do the blanket no change. However, the responsibility does fall on that establishment registrant. So whoever's doing the manufacturing and whoever's listed on that SPL as your registrant would fall as the responsible party to do these blanket no change recertifications. It's not a requirement, so if you are a distributor and you want to be responsible for your own blanket no change, you absolutely can be. However, that responsible party, again, will be the establishment registrant.
Yeah. Julie, I think over the course of years, and I imagine it still happens, maybe you could relate any situations that you have had recently where in some cases the private label distributor is a hands-on type of an operation, and they want to do it yourself, and keep their hands in the pie sort of thing. So they're very aggressive and want to take hold of this particular activity and make sure it's done. And yet the private label, the CMO is also doing it, and I think one takeaway here is that there is communication between the two. The private label distributor is certainly able to do that, but it must be delegated and coordinated. Have you heard any recent, confusion with, who's responsible or, a handoff?
Yeah, I think sometimes there is, confusion here and there on who is genuinely responsible to do these. Again, like you said, the PLDs, they typically like to be very involved with this blanket no change. So sometimes I believe, but then other times, they'll ask their manufacturers to do that on their behalf. And there might be a little miscommunication with who is exactly responsible. So it's definitely good to have a clear line of communication, with your manufacturers or any establishments you're associated with to make sure, the correct party is, fulfilling these requirements, and, you're working together to be certified through the end of the next year.
Yeah. Well, I guess the worst scenario is that, both submit same NDC numbers and, one of them is going to get rejected, but or overriding the other, so it could be a little bit of a mess. All right, let's move on. There's a little bit of data. It's not real big data set here. Just a couple fields that need to be part of the blanket no change.
Yeah. Yes, these are just a few items of information that you definitely want to make sure you have when you're going to do the blanket no change. Of course, this is information that would already be located on those drug listings that you're completing. So if you do not have this information, that's a good place to look. The FDA will look for your company name, your DUNS numbers, and then those NDC codes. For any authorized agent data, they're going to be looking for similar information. So that company's name, their DUNS number, which can be located on the Dun & Bradstreet website. If you do not have one, you can request them there. But that is associated with Dun & Bradstreet and really any of your drug listings. So you can't really do the drug listings without the DUNS. So you definitely would have one if you're completing the blanket no change recertification at the end of the year. But that is a piece of information that will be required on this registration, as well as a contact and a company's name, and of course a list of the NDC codes that you would like to recertify until the end of the following year.
All right, well, that's the data set. Let's talk a little bit about the process. I think you might have some steps here.
Yeah, so the first step is going to be going on to that NDC code directory and confirming, exactly which of your labels are certified until the end of this year and the ones that are certified until the end of next year. You know, like I said, determining that status of if they are certified or if they're not, and making sure you have those lists, you know, cohesive with each other. And then from there, you'll be able to, you know, once you have that authorized agent, your DUNS number, all of that good information we just spoke about, you're able to prepare and submit your blanket no change in SPL. So it would have to be validated in SPL. And then once that validation happens, you know, if there are any validation errors, that's when the, you know, the FDA would come back to you. From there, you can correct those errors and submit any updates. So that's just a high-level process of what it looks like to kind of do the blanket note change. So you're finding your labels and which ones are certified, and then creating your SPL, submitting it, then if any errors happen, alleviating those errors.
All right, well, that's the steps of getting the information to the FDA. There's submission. But what happens now that the file is received by the FDA? I'm going to cover a couple steps that happen in the background of where the FDA does some cross-checks and some validations. So it is a file that links to many different other registrations. So first of all, that blanket no change file is checked to make sure that it, you know, it's a valid SPL file. It, you know, it parses okay, and it meets, you know, the basic requirements of the schema for that particular file. And then the NDC codes are extracted, so those product codes are evaluated, and then cross-referenced to other databases. So the NDC directory and so on. Is this a valid number? You know, is it composed correctly? Correct number of digits? Is it, you know, cross-checked with all those FDA status? You know, is this delisted or expired? Is it on the deficiency list or inactive? So there is this cross-check of the actual NDC numbers. And then the NDC listing has, well, the NDC is found in an NDC listing file, and that particular file is then checked to see that it, in fact, is current and meets all the SPL validation rules. So even though you didn't submit that SPL listing file, by way of your NDC number, you're actually pointing to it and saying, this particular file is, you know, current and valid, meets all the rules. Well, the FDA actually goes back and checks that and takes that particular SPL file and you know, bounces it off the, you know, the current validation rules. So there are situations and possibilities here that you might have had no problem for a couple years, and then in the background, the FDA has changed some validation rules and, you know, put some requirements in place. And now this year, when you point to that particular SPL listing file, which you successfully have been doing like for 2 or 3 years, all of a sudden, you know, this year it fails. And why is that? Well, it's because the validation rules that the FDA has been updated, and now the particular file that you're pointing to doesn't meet that. So it's kind of like a little bit of a surprise, you know, slap in the face. It's like, well, what the heck, you know, because it's been working for 3 years. So that possibly does happen, and in some years it raises its head pretty high because a lot of validation checks were implemented by the FDA. The other thing I'll mention here down at the bottom is that the listing file then points to various establishments. And again, the cross-check is there. The FDA then looks at those establishment registrations. Are those registrations for the particular facility that this particular drug is pointing to, are they valid? You know, has that particular registration been updated? You know, is it, you know, is it out of business? You know, could be out of business. It might not have business operations and other types of cross-checks that need to be in play. So a lot of this background check goes on, and it does increase the possibility for a failure. So now you have a failure, and you thought everything was going smooth, but now you receive this error back. So you have a couple options in remediating that particular error. One is to remove the one or more erroneous NDC codes that are producing the problem. Now, if it's a real simple, straightforward error and it's pretty obvious, like, oh, yeah, it's just typo here, typo there, whatever, and I can make this quick very easily, then you could leave that NDC code in the blanket no change, make the fix the errors and then resubmit it. Now that has to have a new version number, a new date, and so on, and then resubmit it. If it looks a little bit more than a simple, easy fix, the recommendation is to remove that particular NDC code from your list in the blanket no change. And then go ahead and submit the blanket no change, get it done with, all the other particular NDC numbers are then taken care of, and they're ready for next year. They won't be expired. But you do need to clear out that one error, one or more errors out of that blanket no change. So just one error inside might be a 2,000 list or 200 list, whatever you have, will cause the whole blanket no change to fail. So if you have one or two problematic NDC numbers, none of your portfolio or your full list is not going to be accepted. So it's usually a good idea to pull that NDC number out and get the bulk of your listings approved and passed through and make sure it's submitted, and then you can work on correcting the few that have been causing errors. Now there could be one other scenario. Let's say we talked about a success, we talked about this failure. You might miss the deadline. So that has happened. A lot of people for whatever reason didn't make the December 31st deadline, and now you missed it, and you have no certification or an update for the calendar year. December 31st rolls around, and lo and behold, January 1, the FDA runs their process, and your product is now marked expired. So there's a couple impacts of that. One, you're technically violating the regulations of identifying your product, so you're misbranded. But also, in addition to that, your product will then be marked as expired in the NDC directory. Another event is that this product will not be on that NDC SPL data elements file. And you may not have heard of that, but it's actually very important, especially if your product is making use of Center of Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS. So CMS uses that particular file to make sure that the products that they're handling are approved and in good standing for reimbursement purposes. So now all of a sudden if your product goes on to expired, it's off that list, and now there could be financial impacts for CMS reimbursement. The fourth bullet here, we'll need to add a fourth bullet, and that's what Julie had mentioned. Over in the Daily Med, there's a flag for this particular product that it's been expired. Now, you are able to put corrections in place. So now, middle of January, whenever you discover this, you are able to make a new SPL submission for that particular drug product. Unfortunately, it's one at a time. So if you had, 100 drug products that had been on the list but didn't quite get to the FDA in time by December 31st, now you have, a group of 10. And you cannot do it in bulk, but, one at a time. Each SPL would need to be submitted. And once that correction is made, then you go back off that expired list, and then you're back in good standings. I do want to make one additional comment about this particular year. This year is significant in that the FDA has rolled out a requirement for OTC monographs. And OTC monographs, any submissions that you submit as of a month ago, October 1st, 2023, will need to include new terms for the marketing category and the application number. So there is a change that the FDA had been aware of and been working on, and what now the rubber hits the road, and it looks like this, well, we do know that this is now in effect. So if you submit an OTC monograph after October 1st, you'll get a reject if you point to some of the old information. What you need to include for the marketing category is specifically the term OTC monograph drug, and that particular code and term is now on the SPO resources page. And the application numbers, you may remember that you were pointing to a particular Code of Federal Regulation part citation, and you would put that in there and include that for your OTC. They are no longer accepted, so you have to replace those with a monograph number. And there is some mapping for, the CFR part numbers that you used to use. Here's the new monograph number. So after October, you'll need, if you make a submission on an OTC monograph, you would need to include those terms. Well, the question came up, well, what happens if I don't make my change to my monograph? I have no other reason to submit, an update to my OTC monograph. Am I still able to point to that in my blanket no change certification for this year? And the answer from the FDA was, after a little bit of time, yes. So you are able to, point to a particular blanket, or the blanket no change can point to a what I'll refer to as an old SPL OTC listing. We won't go into a whole lot of additional detail. That if you want, you can follow a link there to a webinar that we had on this particular topic. But the question comes up quite frequently, well, what's my strategy? How do I address this, and what are my options? So remember, there's this fourth quarter, so there's this 3-month window from October down to December where you do have to register and list your products. Now, you can, if you so elect, or if you have need to, submit that updated OTC listing with the new monograph terms. That's one of your options. That's option A. With everything going on, maybe that doesn't fit your schedule, so you do actually have a second option. You can submit a blanket no change and point to that NDC number, and that particular listing can have the old OTC listings in place. And you just, treat it like you did last year, point to it, and everything goes smoothly through the system for this year, and it's our understanding that it's only going to be this year. During the course of next year, when maybe you have a little bit of additional time, sometime in 2024, you'll need to submit an updated OTC listing with those new monograph numbers. So that is your two options. One size doesn't fit everyone. Maybe one is better for you. Maybe you want to take care of it and just get it all in place and updated now, so you pick option A. If B looks a little bit better for timing and resources and so on, either one is valid for this particular year. But you won't be able to have these two options next year. You'll have to be pointing to a updated OTC listing. With that, Erin, why don't we do a quick poll? I think you have one prepared for the audience.
Yes. Well, thank you, Gary and Julia, for that information. And now that everyone understands a little bit better, we're hoping that you can answer what FDA year-end reporting you will need to comply with. And please check all that apply: drug establishment registration, drug listing, blanket no change certification. So we'll leave the poll open for about 10 or 15 more seconds just so everyone can get their information in. And then when it's done, we'll just quickly share the results. And Gary and Julia, if you have any thoughts, feel free to say. So I'm going to go ahead and close that poll now, and we're going to share the results with the audience. So I think, unsurprisingly, it looks like most of the people on the call need to comply with most of the reporting.
Yep. So hopefully we were helpful and answered any questions that might have been out there.
Definitely.
So thank you for all those answers. It's, you think you see the ratios of the PLDs and the different organizations. Mostly everybody has to do that blanket no change, and then there's a slightly less amount doing that establishment registration. So makes sense. It all really lines up. And with that, we'll kind of go into some of the options to actually take care of this and get those registrations done.
All right, so let's touch a little bit on what the submission methods might be.
Yeah,
absolutely. I was going to mention the challenges on the left-hand side. We have drug manufacturers, labelers, and they need to get information to the right-hand side, to the FDA. Now, in between, we've identified in this particular case, 4 different preparations method methods that would be available to you. So each of them take the raw data that you pull from various resources. You might have a pretty structured fashion of holding this information. And yet for some small, mid-sized and small companies, sometimes it's not quite as elaborate. And it might just simply be files and various computers and so on. So we've seen quite a mix, range, but data needs to be provided to this particular preparation step. And one of the ways, the top one there, would be that you make use of a service. So you engage a party to collect that information and to build the particular SPL file that needs to be submitted. Whether it be an establishment registration, whether it be a blanket no change, whether it be a listing, whatever needs to be done, the service takes care of that for you. So this would be like an outsourced model where you're able to hand the data over in that particular service then and makes use of that data and builds the SPL, does the submission, and you get the acknowledgement back and say, okay, everything's good. Now, another way, second one down there, is that you make use of a vendor tool, or you might have actually built your own tool that is available. And now you use a particular piece of software to help build that SPL. And you are intimately involved. You're the user. So it's no longer an outsource. It's not a handoff. But now you're building the tool and making use of the information. Usually there's some cross checks and pre-validation before it's actually submitted. So you might work on errors, remediate errors, and have a couple of iterations before it's finally ready to hit the submit button. The third option is that you make use of what is referred to as the FDA X forms. So that is an online tool that you can access and, again, enter your data into that tool. And as a result, the output is an SPL file. In all 3 cases that we've covered so far, the SPL would then be submitted through the Electronic Submission Gateway to the FDA. So whether that is, is a high-speed AS2 connections or whether it's a web trader connection, it makes use of the Electronic Submission Gateway and completes the journey off to the FDA. The last option down here at the bottom is using a platform called Cedar Direct. This is provided by the FDA, online tool where you can go in, enter your data, and you can basically push the button, build the SPL file, and submit. And in the background, it does create an SPL file and then makes a direct connection, so the name of Cedar Direct, and that is directly submitted to the FDA's database. It all ends up at the very same location inside the FDA, but in this case, it does not make use of the Electronic Submission Gateway. Now, the data that is submitted then, depending on what you submitted, so if you submitted an establishment registration, it would show up in Decker's, other places, directory, and so on. So this is some of your options, and a lot of people look at everything they have to do and the various activities. They determine their registrations, their listing, they put a plan together and say, okay, well, this is kind of a way we're going to attack it. I think there's an increasing need and interest in looking at a holistic way of working with this particular data. As part of this discussion, we would like you to consider the ReTech pharma services and our product, a tool, single source for drug products. So, Julie, do you just want to take a quick scan, walk through how this particular solution works?
Yeah, absolutely. So, here at ReTech, we do have a few different options, in order to assist. We do have a software tool that would be able to called single source for drug products, and then additionally, we have an outsourced version as well. And this diagram kind of shows that process very high level. There's many rounds of internal processes that we'll do, to make sure your SPL is correct that first time around. However, this is the process very high level where you would provide us with data. We would utilize that data to generate, we would do validation, QCing, storage, and we can also assist with submission, but we would provide that SPL package to you. You would review it, and then any back and forth with any, things you need to fix, or, that's why we're here to really make it right that first time around, so there's a little bit less guessing in terms of validation or errors. And then from there, we can also submit the SPL to the FDA on your behalf via the Electronic Submission Gateway that Gary had mentioned. We also recently started our ECTD, or Electronic Common Technical Document Services. Of course, that would not be for the blanket no change, but for any marketing applications, we can also assist with that. And then, of course, once the FDA gets it and they approve, they'll take it to their respective NDC directory, Decker's, or the National Library of Medicine's Daily Med.
Very good. Just want to touch on this downloaded page where they could get some more information about how to work with ReTech.
Yeah, absolutely. So single source for drug products is another one of our options where it's a web-based software tool. It has a lot of different reasons, benefits. So it provides a single source where all of your files will live. So a good place for multiple team members at your organization to really view all of those files. They all live in there. So you'd be able to, work on them as a team and never know. There's a lot of really good version control within single source, so it'll show you kind of exactly what version maybe your team member is working on or you're working on. But the one thing that single source does that is really great is it creates the metadata-only SPL on demand. So things like the blanket no change or the establishment registration no change, that SPL can be generated on demand within single source and then also sent to the FDA with the click of a button. So you could really be done everything very, very quickly, with single source. And of course, it validates your information, making sure, there's no errors or warnings within your SPL. So saving a lot of time, and as we all know, time is money. So, saving resources and time, it's a very good tool to get involved with that SPL. But we also offer, a premium service offering with this where, we completely will go into single source for you and do all of that kind of processing work, so you can just spend even less time worrying about these SPL conversions. And again, it shows you everything very up to date, so it'll warn you if anything's an older version. It just really provides a good single place for everything to live regarding your SPL conversions and submissions.
All right, very good. Great summary. Looking at the time, I'm just going to step through a couple additional pages here for your reference. For those that do also manufacture cosmetics, there's some information that you want to be aware of. And here's some references to that graph guidance talking about the end of the year, December 29th. And then just yesterday, there was an update from the FDA indicating as quickly as possible they'll put some guidance together and announce the program launch date. That could be a change to what is currently in place. The last news is December of this year, but we'll wait and see. Again, if you have questions on cosmetic, definitely take a look at this page. Julie, I think you mentioned some of these already, the premium services, ECTD services. Anything that you want to add? A couple others on here?
Yeah, I mean, we will also be offering U.S. agent services. So if that is something that you have a need for now with cosmetics or even with OTCs, anything under the sun, if you need a U.S. agent, we can absolutely assist there. The ECTD services that I mentioned earlier, as well as the single source premium services, and then Health Canada. We also are with creating, Health Canada SPL files. So that is an additional service. But if you do have any questions, you can always reach out to myself. I'm here to help with any questions or concerns.
Yeah, great. Aaron, I think you had one other last poll questions in place here. So maybe we can knock that out. I see we're just a tad over the hour.
Yeah, so I quickly launched this poll question. And this is basically for us to just understand what the industry needs to know more about and how we can help. So select all but apply. Do you need help understanding any of the upcoming mandates? MOCRA, which is the cosmetics mandate, the OTC monograph updates, which Gary covered much earlier in the webinar, year-end deadlines, and then just general SPL, ECTD, or other pharma services. So we are over time, so I'm only going to leave this up for maybe another 10 or 15 seconds. Okay, it looks like the voting has slowed down, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to close this poll. And we can move right along to the next slide. And I think for sake of time, it is 5 after 3. If you asked a question, we do have it. We'll reach out to you individually and make sure that you get an answer. And it does look like all of the questions were extremely specific to individual use cases anyway, so that might be a better use of everyone's time. So if you could just advance to the next slide, Gary. So if you have a question that you didn't ask today, please feel free to reach out to us. pharma@readtech.com or the phone number that's listed right there, and we would be more than happy to walk through any of these topics with you and answer any of your questions. Thank you everyone for attending the webinar today and for your participation, and thank you Gary and Julia for walking us through all of that. That was great information, and we hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.